My father abandoned me at 6 for my sick sister. Now that she died, he came back begging for forgiveness. But my uncle adopted me, and I showed them I already have a real family they never expected. I'm 26 years old. I work in tech. And the truth is, I need to tell this story because every time someone asks me about my family, I just kind of blank out, not knowing what to say. My situation is weird. I mean, technically I have biological parents out there somewhere, but my real parents are my uncle and aunt. Well, I shouldn't even call them that anymore because they legally adopted me when I turned 18. But to understand why my life is like this, I have to go back like 20 years, when everything started falling apart. I was 6 years old. Maybe I had just turned 6 or was about to. I honestly don't remember exactly. But I do remember that day with a clarity that sometimes surprises me. My parents, Andrew and Karen, took me to my grandparents' Ruth and Edward's house on a Saturday morning. I remember I was carrying my blue backpack with a dinosaur on it, the one I loved, and my mom told me I was going to stay a few days with Grandma and Grandpa while they took care of my sister, Charlotte. Charlotte was sick. I knew that. She had always been sick for as long as I could remember. But that day, something felt different. My dad didn't even look me in the eyes when he dropped me off at the door. He just said something about behaving well and they left. My grandmother hugged me and told me everything was going to be okay, that she would make me cookies. And I thought, well, that's cool. I like Grandma's cookies. The first few days were normal. You know, I played with the old toys that were in my dad's room from when he was a kid, watched cartoons, helped my grandfather in the garden. But after like a week, I started asking. When they were coming back for me, my grandmother would tell me, "Soon, honey, soon." But she never gave me a specific date. 2 weeks passed, then 3, and I kept asking. I remember one day I was playing in the living room when my Uncle Peter arrived, my dad's younger brother, and I heard him talking with my grandparents in the kitchen. I didn't understand everything they were saying, but I did hear my name and something about Andrew and Karen not being able to handle everything. At that moment, I didn't process it well. Like, I was 6 years old. What was I going to understand about those things? It was like a month and a half later that my Uncle Peter sat down with me in my grandparents' backyard. He was like 28 years old at the time, had been married to Elizabeth for a few years, and he had always been the cool uncle who brought me gifts and played with me when he came to visit. He sat next to me in those white plastic chairs my grandparents had and said, "Jacob, I need to talk to you about something important." I thought he was going to tell me my parents were coming for me, but no. He explained, with words a 6-year-old could understand, that my parents weren't coming back for me, that Charlotte was very, very sick and needed all their attention, and that I was going to stay with my grandparents for now. I remember I stayed, quiet, processing, and then asked, "But are they going to come visit me?" And he was silent for a moment before saying, "I don't know, champ, I don't know." That night I cried in my bed, in that room that had been my dad's as a kid, and my grandmother came to comfort me. She hugged me and told me everything was going to be okay, that she and Grandpa loved me very much. But I just wanted my mom. I didn't understand why Charlotte was more important than me. I didn't understand what I had done wrong for them to leave me like that. For months, I kept asking myself that. What did I do wrong? Why don't they love me? Those are horrible questions for a 6-year-old to ask themselves, but nobody gave me answers that made sense. My grandparents did what they could. Honestly. My grandmother Ruth cooked my favorite meals. My grandfather Edward took me fishing on Sundays. They helped me with homework, went to my school events. But they were already old, like my grandmother was around 65 and my grandfather almost 70, and you could tell they were tired. It wasn't that they didn't love me, it was that raising a kid at that age wasn't easy. And I think my grandparents were also angry at my dad for what he had done, although they never talked about that in front of me. When I was like 7 years old, almost 8, my Uncle Peter and Aunt Elizabeth started coming more often. At first it was just on weekends. They'd take me to the park or movies, things like that. But then they started coming during the week too, helping me with homework, having dinner with us. One day my uncle told me that my grandparents needed to rest a bit and asked if I'd like to stay with them for a few days. I said yes because honestly I loved being with them. Their house was newer and they had video games, and my Aunt Elizabeth made the best pancakes in the world. Those few days turned into a week, then 2, and suddenly, I had already packed all my stuff and moved in with them permanently. There was no formal conversation about it, it just happened. My grandparents were still part of my life. I saw them often, but Peter and Elizabeth became my primary caregivers. They took me to school, went to parent-teacher meetings, signed my report cards, and the thing is, they did it with so much love, with so much dedication, that eventually I stopped feeling like a burden. With them, I felt loved, important, like they actually cared that I existed. I was probably like 8 years old, maybe 9. I'm not sure. When one day I was playing and naturally said "Mom" to Elizabeth when I needed something. I froze, waiting for her to correct me, but she just smiled with tears in her eyes and came to hug me. From that day I started calling them Mom and Dad, and they never asked me to do it or anything. It just came naturally. Years later I found out they couldn't have children, something about fertility issues, and that they had taken me in not just because I was family but because they really wanted to be parents. Meanwhile, Andrew and Karen, my biological parents, would show up sometimes like ghosts. They'd come every 6 months or so, always without warning, and the visits were awkward as hell. They'd sit in the living room of Peter and Elizabeth's house, ask me how school was going, give me generic gifts they had clearly bought on the way, and leave after an hour. They never asked about my life, for real, about my friends, about what I liked to do. It was like they were distant acquaintances, fulfilling an uncomfortable obligation. And I didn't know what to say to them either. How do you talk to people who abandoned you but are technically your parents? I remember a particularly horrible visit when I was like 11 years old. They came on my birthday. Without warning, obviously, right when I was having a small party with my school friends. They showed up with a cake they had bought at the supermarket, interrupted my party, and acted like they were parents of the year. My friends were confused because I always talked about Peter and Elizabeth as my parents, and suddenly, these strangers appeared saying they were my parents. After they left, I locked myself in my room and cried from frustration. Elizabeth came to talk to me and was honest. She told me that Andrew and Karen were doing what they could, but that didn't change the fact that they had hurt me and that it was okay to be angry. That day, I decided I wasn't going to keep trying with them. I wasn't going to talk to them first anymore, wasn't going to ask when they'd come, wasn't going to expect anything from them. And you know what? My life got better after that. I stopped carrying that painful hope that someday they'd truly love me. When I was 14, Peter and Elizabeth sat down with me and told me the whole story. They explained they had been trying to have kids for years, that they had gone through treatments and everything, but it hadn't worked. They told me that when they had taken me in at first, they just wanted to help my grandparents, but that over time they had realized I was the son they had always wanted. And then they asked me something I'll never forget. Would you like us to adopt you officially? They said we had to wait until I turned 18, because Andrew and Karen technically still had custody and weren't going to give up their parental rights, but that as soon as it was legally possible, they wanted me to officially be their son. I cried like I hadn't cried in years. I told them yes. Of course yes, that they were already my parents in all the ways that mattered. And those next 4 years, waiting for me to turn 18, were some of the best of my life. They supported me in everything. When I decided to study programming, when I started working part-time, when I had my first girlfriend, which lasted like 2 months, but whatever. They were there at every important moment. The day I turned 18, I went to court with them. Andrew and Karen had had to sign papers giving up their parental rights, and apparently they did it without much drama. They didn't come to court, didn't even call me that day. When the judge declared the adoption official and legally changed my last name to Peters, I felt like I had finally closed a painful chapter of my life. I was no longer the abandoned kid. I was Jacob, son of Peter and Elizabeth, period. I started college that same year, studied computer science. My parents, Peter and Elizabeth, helped me with everything, with the application, with looking for scholarships, with moving to campus. They visited me every 2 weeks, called me constantly, made sure I was okay. It was the kind of support I had always wanted from Andrew and Karen, but that I had finally found with the right people. Then something happened that changed everything. I was 20 years old, in my second year of college, when my mom Elizabeth called me crying. Charlotte had died. The illness she had fought her whole life had finally won. She was like 20 years old, too, maybe 21, I'm not sure. The news left me feeling weird, because, she was my biological sister. But honestly, I didn't know her. I had seen her maybe 5 times in my life, always from a distance, always sick. I didn't know how to feel about it. The funeral was a week later. I went because I felt I should, but also because part of me was curious to see Andrew and Karen after so many years. And the church was full of people. Everyone crying for this girl I barely knew. I saw my biological parents in the first row, devastated. And for a moment, I felt something like pity. They had dedicated their whole lives to taking care of Charlotte, and now she was gone. But then I remembered they had abandoned me to do that, and the pity turned into something more complicated. I stayed in the back with my parents, Peter and Elizabeth. I didn't approach Andrew and Karen, didn't give them my condolences, basically acted like they didn't exist. After the service, Andrew tried to approach, but I avoided him, walked out of the church, and left. I had nothing to say to him, honestly. I thought that would be it, but no. Like 2 weeks later, on Christmas, something happened that still makes me angry. My parents and I went to midnight mass, something we did every year with my grandparents. It's a tradition at our church, like it's beautiful, candles and carols and all that. We were there, at peace, when suddenly I see Andrew and Karen sitting like 5 rows ahead. My first reaction was to think, seriously? Do they have to show up here too? After mass, as we were leaving, they approached. Karen had red eyes, like she had been crying, and Andrew had that guilty face he had probably been carrying for years. They stood in front of me, and Karen said, "Jacob, we need to talk to you." And I don't know what came over me, but something in me completely shut down. I looked them straight in the eyes and said, "Sorry, I think you're confusing me with someone else," and I turned around and left. I heard them calling me, "Jacob, please. We just want to talk," but I kept walking. Peter and Elizabeth caught up with me in the parking lot, and Peter asked if I was okay. I told him, yes, that I just wanted to go home. In the car back, nobody said anything, but my mom, Elizabeth, took my hand and squeezed it, and that was enough. I thought they'd get the message with that, but like a week later, letters started arriving. Long, desperate letters, where they explained that now that Charlotte was gone, they realized what they had lost with me, that they wanted a second chance, that they understood if I was angry, but to please give them the chance to explain. I read the first letter completely, and it made me feel so many things at once that I had to go out for a walk for like an hour to calm down. The next letters I didn't even open, just put them in a drawer. My parents advised me to do what felt right, that there was no right or wrong answer. My grandmother, Ruth, who by then was like 85, 2 years old, told me something that stuck with me. You can forgive if you want, but you don't have to forget, and you definitely don't have to let them back into your life if you don't want to. After like 2 months of receiving letters, I decided to respond. Not because I wanted a relationship with them, but because I needed to close this in a definitive way. I wrote them a letter, just one, where I basically told them, I understand you're going through your own grief with Charlotte's loss, and I don't wish you harm, but I'm not ready to forgive you, and I don't know if I ever will be. You abandoned me when I needed you most, and that wound doesn't heal just because you now realize you made a mistake. I have parents who love me, a family that has always been there, and that's the family I choose. I asked them to respect my decision and stop contacting me. After sending that letter, no more came. I don't know if they finally understood or if they just gave up, but there was silence. And, honestly, that silence felt like a relief. Now I'm 26. I graduated a few years ago. I work at a pretty good tech company. I live like 30 minutes from my parents' house. I see them every week. My mom, Elizabeth, still makes those incredible pancakes on Sundays. My dad, Peter, and I go fishing sometimes, like he used to do with my grandfather Edward before he passed away 2 years ago. My grandmother Ruth is still with us. She's 95 years old, and is still that loving presence she always was. I haven't heard from Andrew and Karen again. Sometimes I wonder how they're doing, if they're okay, if they think about me. But those are thoughts that come and go quickly. because the truth is my life is complete without them. I don't hate them. I think I reached a point where I just don't feel anything toward them. Neither love nor hate, just indifference. A few weeks ago, I was having dinner with my parents, and we were talking about old memories, and my dad Peter mentioned that day in my grandparents' backyard when he told me that Andrew and Karen weren't coming back for me. He asked if I remembered that, and I told him yes, that I remembered it perfectly. And he got emotional and told me that had been the day he decided he was going to do everything possible to give me the childhood I deserved, that he never wanted to see me suffer like that. I told him he had succeeded, that thanks to him and Mom, I had had a happy childhood despite everything. I guess if there's something I learned from all this, it's that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the people who choose to stay when others leave, the people who hug you when you cry, who celebrate your achievements as if they were their own. Peter and Elizabeth saved me from a life of resentment and pain. They gave me unconditional love when I needed it most, and for that I'll be eternally grateful. Will I ever forgive Andrew and Karen? I don't know, honestly. Maybe when I'm older, when I have my own kids, I'll better understand the difficult decisions they made, or maybe I'll never forgive them, and that's okay too. What I do know is that it doesn't keep me up at night anymore. I don't spend nights wondering what I did wrong or why I wasn't enough for them, because now I understand that the problem was never me, it was them and their priorities, and that's something they have to carry, not me. Last week, my mom asked me if I ever regretted closing the door with Andrew and Karen. I told her no, that I had made the right decision for me. She nodded and said, "I'm proud of you for knowing what you need and for not being afraid to set boundaries," and that, coming from her, meant everything. So yeah, that's my story. It doesn't have a perfect movie ending where everyone reconciles and cries together. It's more complicated than that, more real. But I'm at peace with how things turned out, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters.